type of yacht that became popular in the late 60s and 70s was a fiberglass version of the traditional motorsailer. These handsome vessels were often modelled on traditional working craft with full bodies of liberal displacement and substantial wheelhouses. While there were several different designs of various parentage available, such as Fishers, Nauticats, Banyers, Ruggers and Colvics, they all had certain features in common. These were a large displacement, short rigs often as a ketch even in the smaller sizes, long keels of modest draft, a powerful engine and large tanks. Over the years and in the public's opinion, the traditional motorsailer became associated with sluggish performance, a lack of windward ability, a propensity for uncomfortable and excessive rolling, and, in port, an unreasonably difficult and unpredictable handling. We own such a vessel, a 42-year-old somewhat modified Colvic Watson 32. I have been assured by some gentlemen on a German forum that such a plump, awkward and not to mention slow craft is entirely unsuitable for cruising, particularly for the older sailor. Ironically, we had just, old as we are, successfully completed a blissfully uneventful 2,500-mile voyage from Brittany to the north of the Shetlands and back, and this in spite of the at times adverse weather conditions. No matter how unpleasant or wet the weather may have been at times, our comfortable, warm and heated wheelhouse made the voyage pleasant and enjoyable at all times. With this video, I hope to show how it is possible to have your own nicely performing pint-sized expedition yacht that is capable of carrying you and all your gear to places most people only dream of, and to do so in comfort and at a modest cost. In regards to the Colvic Watson Motorsailer, I quote from a Yachting Monthly review in June 2021. They certainly aren't the quickest under sail, due mainly to their considerable wetted surface and heavy displacement, and neither are they very close-winded. Her barn door style rudder also results in a good deal of weather helm, but her ample beam also adds considerable form stability and stiffness under sail, and she loves gentle motor sailing to windward, with her large diesel humming quietly at little more than tick-over revs. It has been my impression that magazine reviews tend to employ the same craftily vague language an estate agent might use to describe a derelict object. Allow me to translate. A CW is dreadfully slow, overly heavy, and will not go to windward. Her unsophisticated steering gear causes steering and balance issues, and overall the boat is a bit of a tub that needs engine assistance to make it to weather at all. Unlike other motorsailer designs, development of the Colvic Watson remained static throughout its years in production and beyond. Unfortunately, no efforts were made by the designers to address any of the, even back then, well-known issues with their steering and balance, and more to the point, their very modest sailing performance. I shall address the points of criticism in the review individually, starting with weather helm and steering, moving on to performance and windward ability, and finally a few words on general handling of the Colvic Watson. In my opinion, the lines of the Watson hull are among the finest ever conceived for a motorsailer. Unfortunately, much of her potential is wasted by the incredibly crude design of her steering gear. Apparently, hydrodynamics were not part of this designer's vocabulary. As you can see, we have an ineffective flat steel plate rudder attached by what has to be an agricultural level keel shoe and, to make things worse, all trailing behind a 6 inches and wider blunt-ended deadwood. Under sail and without the prop wash to assist, the inefficient rudder fails to generate sufficient lift in the turbulence behind the deadwood and consequently has trouble steering the boat. Furthermore, the sharp leading edge of the rudder, already struggling in a vortex of disturbed water, is prone to flow separation and early stall. To top things off, the Watson rudder at 5% of lateral plane, and perfectly suitable for a displacement powerboat, is some 40% too small for a long keel sailing vessel. The problems with the Watson steering are well documented, officially at least, since Yachting Monthly did a review in the late 70s, and again as recently as in June 2021. The issues reported include not only the aforementioned excessive weather helm, but there is more. Under sail, of course, we have the excessive weather helm, combined with early rudder stall, a reluctance or outright inability to tack, sluggish steering due to a deadward turbulence, a tendency to wander going downwind, and often the autopilot may have trouble steering. Not all of Watson's steering problems are associated with sailing. Under power they can be difficult to maneuver in port, they cannot really be steered or maneuvered in reverse, the deadwood causes an exaggerated prop walk effect in reverse, and the deadwood can cause cavitation and prop inefficiency, as well as an unnecessarily long stopping distance. I know this may all sound like the end of the world, but it is a problem that is surprisingly easily fixed and furthermore well within the abilities of your average handyman. Well, this was the plan, and this was the result, and this is how we did it. When increasing the rudder size, care must be taken not to overload the rudder stock. 20% seemed like a safe and reasonable amount. This we augmented with a small pressure wedge for a 17% increase in efficiency and declared the sum of its parts close enough to the missing 40%. Finally, we added an NACA profile for maximum stall resistance. In my estimation, these modifications should be well within the ability of your average handyman. Indeed, other owners, following my suggestions, have simply glued the foam to the back of the deadwood and then glassed it over. The results were much the same. The difference before and after is simply put, like chalk and cheese, and without trying it, it can be difficult to comprehend how significant the improvement is. As to our handling in port, I can say that we almost always back into a slip, as our over 6 foot high bow requires alpine level skills to disembark. And, to our own great surprise, she backs up and steers in reverse. Really. The next step for us was to increase sail area. This would have not been possible, or quite pointless really, if we hadn't resolved the rudder and deadwood issues first. By this time we had sailed Anne some 8,500 miles in all conditions. We were happy with her seaworthiness, we loved the wheelhouse, but we wanted light air performance, improved sail balance, and reduced dependency on the engine. To make a boat fly, you need two things: a high sail area displacement ratio and the stability to carry it. We were lucky inasmuch as our boat already had a 6 foot taller mainmast and longer booms, and consequently a larger sail area. The Colvic Watson has a length displacement ratio of 360, which is quite high by today's standards, however still a lot less than some of the competition. This now brings us to the real reason for a Watson's poor sailing performance, apart from their unfortunate rudder deadwood design, that is. Even by motorsailor standards, the Watson family have some of the lowest sail area displacement ratios for the type. In spite of our boat already having an enhanced rig, we still didn't feature in Ted Brewer's list. As the greater part of all recreational sailing takes place in wind speeds below 504, It only makes sense to have a boat that performs when the weather is still nice. While there is no hydrostatic data available for a CW32, there are a number of ways to determine righting moment for an existing vessel. For example, you can time her roll period, or you can calculate stability from the lines. I did both, and therefore I had a basis for designing a new sail plan. Due to Watson's excellent stability derived from a wide beam and a hard bilge, I was able to give her a sail area displacement ratio usually only found in a cruiser racer. For all intents and purposes, we were able to double the sail area over the standard model while retaining a wind pressure coefficient suitable for ocean sailing. As predicted in my calculations and later confirmed on the water, we can carry full sail up to 21 knots of wind. It has been my observation over the years that many amateur-built bowsprits are under-engineered, overbuilt, and consequently unnecessarily heavy. This adds weight in all the wrong places and doesn't do the boat's pitching moment any favour. By careful design, I was able to keep our bowsprit's weight down to 16 kilos. So did we meet our objectives of light wind performance, improved sail balance, and reduced dependence on the engine? On the wind, the boat now steers herself while retaining a slight and beneficial weather helm. Rudder angles are significantly reduced. Generally speaking, and in the lighter conditions, we seem to reach approximately half the apparent wind speed and speed through the water. Due to our dramatically improved light weather performance, we motor 75% less. If you have further interest in what we did with our Colvic Watson and how we did it, feel free to read up on it in my June 2020 article in Practical Boat Owner magazine. One of the first questions people have right after the hello, how are you, where you're from, is how fast will she go? Now bear in mind we're talking about a heavy displacement boat with a 28-foot waterline and a nominal hull speed of 7.12 knots. Before we get any further, I cannot emphasize enough that none of the following performances would have been possible without making the modifications to the rudder and deadwood first. I intentionally left this clip unedited and fairly long to show that the speed isn't a blip of Anne falling off a wave, but a sustained performance. To be sure, we have on occasion reached speeds closer to the 9-knot mark, even sustained them for brief moments in time, but in the scheme of things that is irrelevant. The next few clips show us sailing across the Minch in a rather lumpy sea. We're doing well over 7 knots most of the way, and you may want to note that the decks are nice and dry. In fact, I can happily attest that she is one of the driest boats I've ever sailed on, and that includes ones that were considerably larger. Considering that this type has the reputation of not being able to get out of its own way in anything short of a storm, we find that she puts up a pretty good performance. This is Anne at her best, sailing on a broad reach around the south of Mull. The water is flat, wind is blowing 20 knots, gusting 25. The boat is not heeling a great deal, and we are making 8 knots through the water. The next question we get usually is, does she go to windward? And the answer is yes, of course she does. She does prefer flat water, and so do we. To windward, her increased sail area helps her a lot. Speed is your friend. To be sure, this is not her favorite course, but given a flat sea, she can point better than 40 degrees and make good some 45 degrees with leeway. She is, after all, a fat little ketch, and her underwater lines do not help matters either. However, all in all, I would say that for a cruising boat, her windward ability is absolutely adequate. Be that as it may, it has been our observation that no matter how efficient the underwater shapes may be, most other cruising boats either motor to windward or wait out for a better slant. Yes, a very leisurely sail along the southern coast of Cornwall, where we are doing 5 knots and just 7 knots of true wind. And here we are sailing up the Irish coast in just 11 knots of wind, doing 6 knots through the water. One of our main goals with increasing sail area was not for ultimate speed, but to increase our light weather performance. This we have achieved. The next images were taken from a standard rigged but larger sister ship we were rapidly overtaking. As you can see, the wind and the sea states were very slight, and yet we're making good speed. Downwind sailing. Even a haystack will sail to leeward, they say. However, downwind is of all courses the most demanding of the ship, her course keeping and steering ability, and by some measure, potentially the most dangerous. Right, this shows us running down the French coast under spinnaker and mizzen. The wind is in the high 20s, occasionally gusting 30. Boat speed is between 7 and 8 knots. There's no rolling, straight wake, and hardly any yaw. The steering is courtesy of Arnold, our less than bright autopilot. In comparison, I had the experience of sailing a lovely Robert Clark design across the Pacific and back, which, in similar circumstances, would roll through 100 degrees and require so much attention at the helm that the crew would be quite exhausted at the end of their watch. Our next clip shows Arnold doing his thing. A leisurely quarter turn of the wheel, which equals 2.5 degrees rudder angle, is all it takes to keep Anne on track. We sailed like this for some 70 miles. I had stood watch the previous night, all throughout the night, and I was feeling exhausted, so I lay down for a nap, while my wife stayed up in the wheelhouse and wrote in her journal. All the while the boat sailed on, not needing any further attention. As is evident, and in spite of a substantial swell coming in on her quarter, she is keeping a nice straight course and making good speed to leeward. No matter how steep the swell or oblique the angle to the boat, there is absolutely no indication that she may run out of her rudder. At all times she's under perfect control. No matter what one may say about her windward ability, downwind she tracks like a train. There is no pronounced rolling. There is never been a tendency to broach. And yes, she can be steered by autopilot, even a slow one. Well, it seems some haystacks just do much better downwind than others. One of the qualities in a good cruising boat, apart from seaworthiness and comfort, is the ability to maintain high average speeds in order to keep passage times reasonable. In this context, I would like to present some of the more notable passages we've made in Big Anne. One of the longest passages we have done to date in Big Anne was from Peel on the Isle of Man to the Isles of Scilly. That's a total of 270 nautical miles in 42 hours at an average speed of 6.43 knots. The first few hours we were close hauled in very light conditions and averaged about 5.1 knots. Thereafter the winds shifted and picked up, and for the remaining 28.5 hours we averaged 7 knots, dolphins included. And this passage was from IJmuiden to Dieppe, 210 nautical miles and 35 hours at an average of 6 knots. One of many of this summer's passages from Guernsey to Plymouth in 14 hours at an average speed of 6.8 knots. This in spite of foul tides around the southern end of Guernsey. And this brings us to the end. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and that I was able to show you that the traditional motor sailor need not be the awkward thing they are often made out to be. Indeed, with some considered modification, they can be made into what has to be one of the finest and most versatile cruising vessels around, able and ready to take their crews to many of the more challenging cruising grounds, and to do so with their passengers sheltered from the worst of the elements and without the unpleasant ordeal of having to climb into the still wet foul weather gear at the beginning of the watch on a nasty night. These boats are supremely seaworthy, comfortable and kind to their crews. They can go to weather in a perfectly acceptable fashion, and they definitely need not be as slow under sail as their reputation suggests. Not by any measure.